"We've scrubbed your name from the IPO, honey. It's better for the brand if your brother is the face of my legacy," Grandpa announced after the press conference. He didn't know I'd spent 3 years coding the backend. As he went to ring the opening bell, I hit execute. The stock price didn't just drop. The entire company's digital infrastructure decrypted into gibberish. A $2 billion valuation turned into a 404 error before he could finish his speech. The day they attempted to write me out of the company was the day everything turned to ashes. The sharp, sterile scent of ozone and the low, continuous hum of enterprise-grade server racks formed the only atmosphere I knew for the past 3 years. I sat at a makeshift desk in the sub-basement of Vanguard Logistics, my grandfather's supposedly modernized shipping empire, staring at the lines of complex code scrolling across my primary monitor. My name is Persis, and I am the lead backend engineer for the proprietary routing algorithm that transformed a struggling regional freight company into a $2 billion global juggernaut. I did not inherit a corner office or a C-suite title like my older brother Leonard. I inherited my grandfather Robert's relentless drive, but unfortunately for me, Robert believed that drive belonged exclusively to the male heirs of his bloodline. When I presented the initial framework for the predictive routing software shortly after graduating with my computer science degree, Robert dismissed my work as a mere hobby project, refusing to allocate a single dollar of corporate funding to support my development. Leonard, who possessed a marketing degree and a staggering lack of technical competence, convinced Robert to let me build the system to keep me busy, offering me a nominal salary and an isolated workstation in the basement. I accepted the terms because I believed the undeniable brilliance of the finished product would force my grandfather to finally recognize my value and grant me my rightful place as a co-founder of the new technological division. I worked 90-hour weeks, missing holidays, birthdays, and the basic experiences of my 20s, fueled entirely by the desperate need to prove my worth to a family that viewed my gender as a professional liability. The algorithm I created was a masterpiece of digital architecture, utilizing machine learning to predict global shipping delays, enhance freight routes in real time, and slash operating costs by an unprecedented 40%. When the system went live and the profit margins skyrocketed, Vanguard Logistics became the most attractive acquisition target in the sector, prompting Robert to initiate an initial public offering to capitalize on the massive valuation. For 6 months, I worked alongside the external tech auditors, proving the stability and scalability of my code, assuming my name would feature prominently in the S-1 filing submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The betrayal occurred on the morning of the IPO, exactly 2 hours before Robert and Leonard were scheduled to ring the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. I stood in the opulent, wood-paneled boardroom on the top floor of the Vanguard Tower, expecting to ride in the limousine to the exchange. Grandpa stood at the head of the long table, adjusting his expensive tie, while Leonard scrolled through his phone, ignoring my presence. I asked Grandpa what time the car was arriving for me. He stopped adjusting his tie, offering me a look of cold, calculating dismissal that shattered the illusion of family loyalty I had clung to for years. "We've scrubbed your name from the IPO, honey. It's better for the brand if your brother is the face of my legacy," he announced, his voice devoid of any genuine apology or remorse. He explained that the investment bankers preferred a cohesive narrative, and a young female engineer operating out of a basement did not project the image of corporate stability they desired. Leonard chimed in, claiming that my contribution, while helpful, was merely technical execution, and that his strategic vision was the true catalyst for the company's success, since he pleaded with Grandpa in the first place. The legal team had already drafted a revised corporate history, omitting my involvement and attributing the creation of the routing algorithm directly to Leonard. They offered me a minor cash bonus and a middle management title in exchange for my silence, treating my 3 years of grueling, isolated labor as a disposable commodity they could purchase and discard. I stared at the two men who shared my DNA, realizing with horrifying clarity that my grandfather did not view me as a granddaughter or an equal. He viewed me as an exploitable resource, a piece of machinery designed to elevate Leonard's unearned prestige. The pain of the betrayal was a physical ache in my chest, a suffocating realization that no amount of brilliance or sacrifice would ever overcome the deep-seated misogyny woven into the fabric of my family. I did not attempt to argue the merits of my contribution, because I understood that logic held no power against their entrenched arrogance. I simply nodded, accepted the brutal reality of my position, and told them I needed to return to the basement to monitor the server load during the public launch. Grandpa smiled, pleased by my apparent submission, and told me to watch the broadcast on the television in my office. I took the elevator down to the sub-basement, the silence of the descent mirroring the absolute emotional detachment settling over my mind. I walked to my workstation, woke up my primary monitor, and accessed the foundational root directory of the Vanguard network, staring at the intricate architecture I had built with my own hands. I possessed a secret they were entirely unaware of. The algorithm was not a static piece of software they could simply claim ownership of and operate independently. The system required a continuous, highly encrypted cryptographic handshake from a localized master key to maintain structural integrity, a failsafe I designed to prevent external corporate espionage. I held that master key. I opened a terminal window and began writing a deeply embedded execution script, a command designed to sever that cryptographic handshake and initiate a cascading decryption protocol across every server, cloud backup, and active terminal within the Vanguard infrastructure. I watched the live feed of the stock exchange on my secondary monitor, seeing Grandpa Robert and Leonard standing on the balcony overlooking the trading floor, their faces glowing with the triumphant anticipation of unearned wealth. As Robert reached out his hand to grasp the gavel and ring the opening bell, I placed my finger over the execute key, the weight of 3 years of exploitation compressing into a single decisive action. The moment the heavy brass bell echoed through the exchange, signaling the beginning of public trading and the official launch of the $2 billion Vanguard IPO, I pressed the key, sending the decryption protocol surging through the network faster than the speed of their arrogance. The execution script deployed with terrifying, silent efficiency, slicing through the foundational architecture of the Vanguard logistics network like a surgical blade severing a major artery. I sat in the dim light of the sub-basement, my eyes fixed on the diagnostic monitors as the green streams of healthy data rapidly shifted to a violent, flashing crimson, indicating total system failure. The cryptographic handshake failed instantly, triggering the cascading decryption protocol that began systematically unraveling the neural network algorithm I had painstakingly built over 3 years. The complex predictive models, the real-time global freight tracking, and the automated financial ledgers were not simply deleted. They were violently scrambled, translated into millions of lines of completely incomprehensible, unrecoverable gibberish. On the live broadcast from the New York Stock Exchange, the atmosphere of triumphant celebration shattered within seconds of the opening bell. Robert stood on the balcony, his hand still resting on the wooden handle of the gavel, smiling broadly for the press photographers. Behind him, the massive digital ticker tape displaying the newly listed Vanguard stock symbol, updated for the first time, the initial offering price of $45 a share flickered, froze, and then plummeted to zero as the automated trading algorithms of the major investment banks detected a catastrophic data blackout originating from Vanguard's central servers. The financial institutions, entirely reliant on the real-time data feeds generated by my routing algorithm to verify the company's operating capacity, instantly triggered their emergency abort protocols, flooding the market with massive sell orders before a single retail investor could purchase a share. The floor of the exchange erupted into sheer chaos. Traders began screaming into their headsets, frantically gesturing toward the Vanguard executives on the balcony. Leonard, who had been busy taking a selfie to post on his corporate social media accounts, looked down at the trading floor, his manufactured confidence evaporating as he realized the $2 billion valuation was actively disintegrating in front of a global audience. The lead investment banker managing the IPO sprinted up the stairs to the balcony, his face pale with panic, holding a tablet displaying a massive 404 error host server unreachable message across the primary Vanguard logistics portal. I watched Robert's expression shift from arrogant pride to profound confusion, and then to sheer, unadulterated terror as the banker shoved the tablet into his hands. My cell phone, resting on the desk beside my keyboard, began vibrating, the screen flashing with a continuous barrage of incoming calls from Leonard, Robert, and the internal IT department. I ignored the calls, focusing entirely on the terminal window verifying the absolute destruction of the digital infrastructure. The algorithm was the sole reason Vanguard possessed a $2 billion valuation. Without the predictive routing capabilities, they were merely an outdated fleet of trucks drowning in operational debt. By attempting to steal my intellectual property and erase my existence to inflate Leonard's unearned ego, they had unknowingly severed the only tether keeping their empire from collapsing under its own massive weight. The phones on the desks of the IT technicians down the hall began ringing incessantly, a chorus of panic echoing through the sub-basement, as regional managers across the globe reported total logistical paralysis. Ships were stranded in ports without unloading manifests, and thousands of freight trucks sat idling on highways without delivery routes. The company was completely blind, stripped of the technological advantage I had provided them. I stood up from my workstation, packed my personal laptop and my engineering notebooks into my leather messenger bag, and walked toward the elevator bank, entirely undisturbed by the chaos unfolding above me. I did not feel a shred of guilt or remorse for the destruction I unleashed, because I was not destroying their property. I was simply repossessing my own. They demanded I sacrifice my future to secure Leonard's legacy, while underestimating the lethality of the person who actually controls the machinery they claim to own. I stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the ground floor lobby, preparing to walk out of the Vanguard Tower for the final time. The doors opened to a scene of total corporate panic. Security guards were frantically attempting to manage the influx of angry investors and panicked reporters swarming the reception desk, demanding an explanation for the sudden, catastrophic failure of the IPO. I slipped through the crowd unnoticed, an anonymous female employee holding a messenger bag, invisible to the executives who were currently watching their entire financial existence burn to the ground on live television. I pushed through the glass revolving doors, stepping out into the crisp, chaotic energy of the financial district, pulling my coat tight against the wind. My phone vibrated again. It was a text message from Grandpa, typed in frantic, desperate capital letters. "Fix this now. The stock is dead. The SEC is investigating. I will give you whatever you want. Co-founder, board seat, just fix it." I read the message, feeling a profound sense of liberation wash over me, completely untethered from the toxic obligation I had carried for years. I typed a single, decisive response. "You cannot fix a 404 error on a server that no longer exists. Enjoy the legacy you built for Leonard." I dropped the phone into my pocket, walked toward the subway station, and disappeared into the crowd, leaving the family I once knew trapped in the inescapable wreckage of their own profound arrogance. The fallout from the disastrous Vanguard Logistics IPO was swift, brutal, and very public, dominating the financial news cycles for weeks as the most spectacular corporate implosion of the decade. Without the proprietary routing algorithm, the company's growing operating debts, which had been temporarily obscured by the hype of the impending public offering, were immediately exposed to hostile scrutiny. The Securities and Exchange Commission launched a federal investigation into the sudden data collapse, freezing all of Vanguard's assets and demanding full transparency regarding the technological framework the company claimed to possess in their S-1 filings. Robert and Leonard, incapable of explaining the complex mathematics behind the software they supposedly invented, crumbled under the pressure of the federal inquiry. During a publicized congressional hearing regarding corporate data security, Leonard was forced to admit, under oath, that he possessed absolutely no coding experience and had no understanding of how the algorithm functioned. The admission triggered a wave of shareholder lawsuits alleging severe securities fraud and deliberate misrepresentation of intellectual property. The investment banks that backed the IPO aggressively pursued litigation to recoup their losses, resulting in a total liquidation of Vanguard's physical assets. Within 6 months, the fleet of trucks was sold at auction, the warehouses were shuttered, and the Vanguard Tower was repossessed by the commercial lenders. Grandpa, facing severe financial ruin and the total destruction of his reputation, was forced to declare personal bankruptcy, losing his estate and his unearned prestige. Leonard, stripped of his unearned executive title and permanently blacklisted from the corporate sector due to the fraud allegations, was reduced to begging our extended relatives for loans to cover his mounting legal fees. They were completely ruined, crushed under the weight of the lie they constructed to preserve their fragile male egos. I did not stay in New York to watch them sift through the ashes of their empire. I moved to Canada, operating under a newly registered offshore corporation with airtight intellectual property protections, and spent a year rebuilding the foundational architecture of my algorithm. Because the original Vanguard code had been completely scrambled into useless data, and because Robert and Leonard had sworn under oath that they were the sole creators of the software that failed, there was absolutely no legal mechanism tying my new, vastly superior product to the bankrupt shell of my grandfather's company. I pitched the upgraded software directly to a Canadian supply chain conglomerate, presenting myself as the sole creator, lead engineer, and absolute owner of the technology. The executives did not care about my gender, they did not care about my age, and they certainly did not care about my lack of a corner office. They only cared about the undeniable efficiency of the mathematics. I negotiated a lucrative, continuous licensing agreement, securing my total financial independence, and permanently validating the thousands of hours of isolated labor I had endured in that miserable sub-basement. I never received an apology from Robert or Leonard, nor did I ever expect one. They were men entirely consumed by their own superficial arrogance, completely incapable of recognizing the lethal danger of underestimating the person who actually builds the foundation they stand on. They assumed they could steal my brilliance simply because I was quiet and compliant, but they fundamentally failed to understand that the person who writes the code is the only person who controls the machine. I let them keep the empty titles, the fraudulent SEC filings, and the shattered company, completely satisfied in the knowledge that they would spend the rest of their miserable lives knowing they held $2 billion in their hands, only to watch it vanish into a 404 error because they forgot to respect the girl who built the switch. I proved exactly what they failed to understand. You cannot build a legacy by stealing the labor of the people you oppress, because eventually the architect will walk away and the entire structure will collapse.